The Danakil Desert is one of the lowest and hottest places on Earth, a cauldron of burning salt, volcanic rock, and sulfuric acid. The Danal volcanic crater is hostile and toxic, and not exactly the best or safest place for a television production team to set up. Filming day after day in punishing temperatures over 120 degrees, the team are dealing with crashing drones, failing camera equipment, and magnetic interference. But turns out this is just a regular day at the office when shooting a megadoc that features Will Smith and 8 astronauts for National Geographic.
I knew I couldn't go back.
You
just put it out there.
She said you've got less than a year to live.
Just dug even
Luck
deeper.
is the residue of design.
Nobody else was doing it, so why couldn't I?
That was the turning point.
Welcome to the BUCKiT podcast with Phil Keoghan. Every week I talk to mavericks, disruptors, and innovators. People who ditch the excuses, swerve off the predictable road, and epitomize what it means to tick it before you kick it.
If you don't have moments when you're totally terrified, I think you're kind of probably a mad person. You have to have that moment. Are we really? And then people go, yeah, let's do it. And you've all got to hold hands and say, yes, this is crazy, but we're going to give it a try anyway.
Jane Root is a leading creative executive producer who has transformed major networks on both sides of the Atlantic. Previously president of Discovery Networks and controller of BBC Two in the UK, Jane set up the production company Nutopia about a decade ago. She's won many awards with her formats, achieved record-breaking ratings, and pioneered a new genre of television, the megadoc. The majority of her work is about our amazing planet and the people who live on it. And last year, her series One Strange Rock, hosted by Will Smith on National Geographic Channel, won critical acclaim. And it's not hard to see why. It's incredible and groundbreaking on every level. You get to see the Earth in a whole new, mind-blowing way. I met up with Jane Root recently as she was gearing up for Season 2 of this brilliant series. She promises she's going to be raising the bar even higher. First of all, Jane, thanks for taking some time out to come and talk to me. Congratulations on One Strange Rock. We'll talk about whether there's going to be a follow-up because I know you've said that there's a lot more to follow up on. But what an absolutely extraordinary mega doc series. Really mind-blowing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it became this huge thing. It started from something little and became a big thing.
And you've been involved in a lot of big things over the years. I remember years ago I was hosting an event and you'd won an award when you were at Discovery, and I think it was Planet Earth at that time, which that in itself was big. I thought that was a big perspective of the Earth until I saw One Strange Rock and I realized, wow, it can be even bigger. It's the same place, but you did something even more special with this.
A long time ago, we had this idea when we started Nutopia that there's really big stories out there to tell. And if you aim for something that hasn't been done before and is huge, that actually there's a lot of people who are interested in that. You know, lots of people make great small things, but the big moment, that's a big thing.
Does that scare you at all when you think about something that is as big as this project is? Does it scare you, or do you go into it thinking, I've got this? I mean, is the confidence high all the way through it, or is there fear?
If you don't have moments when you're totally terrified, I think you're kind of probably a mad person,
right?
Really. You know, you have to have, I think it's that thing you actually have to say, can we really possibly do this? And everyone on the team kind of laughs, and you have to have that moment. Are we really? And then people go, yeah, let's do it. And you've all got to hold hands and say, yes, this is crazy, but we're going to give it a try anyway.
And one of the things I know about you is you've always said you've got to have a strong team around you. So just give us the origin of where this all came from. Because first, National Geographic came to you, didn't they? And they said, Jane, we want to do something big. We want to do something big and bold. Is that how that happened?
Yeah, that's right. There was a very casual conversation. And we just sort of like, that's interesting. And then I went back the next day to London, where our big main office is. And people started playing around with what is there out there about the Earth, and what are the ideas out there. And when we come across a territory, we usually do a couple of things. We have a look at what innovations are happening technically, what new technology is there out there. And in this case, there's a ton of exciting new stuff that you could look at. So we assembled some footage of what there was, what we might play with. And we also talk to experts about, is there new thinking out there? Are people thinking about the Earth's relationship to the universe in a different way? One thing we did decide pretty early on was that this wasn't really going to be about space. It was going to be about the Earth, that somehow people had spent a lot of time looking outwards, but it was interesting to look inwards. That was an idea that solidified in the first couple of days.
How did you get past what you had already done with Planet Earth, because that was such a marvel in itself? I mean, people just they would be in awe. It was like Earth porn, if you like. I mean, the footage was so good on that. But
that was done by the Natural History Unit when I was working for the BBC and then for Discovery, and that's like Natural History Unit has been going forever, and people do things that they talk in 10-year projects and 5-year projects, and there's always, it's a group of people always trying to do the next thing, but very focused on animals. And we took the decision early on with Planet Earth that we weren't going to try and compete with what the Natural History Unit does about animals. We were going to do something different.
On another level. Yeah, and you really did. I was just reading in the 10-part series, took over a year to do, 900,000 miles, which is almost like going to the moon and back twice, 139 shoots, 6 continents, 45 countries, 1,600 feet below the ground in one shoot, and then 286 miles above the Earth, which then begs the question, the choice about the astronauts. You're saying that you weren't wanting to look out as much as look in, but then you did go out to look in, and you chose astronauts, some wonderful astronauts, 8 astronauts.
Well, that was a really good story in that we started off thinking that maybe we would have a host to the show, and there was a lot of playing around with that, but we never quite could find, the right person. Did we need a host? Could we do it without a host at all? And back and forward. We were working with a wonderful woman, good friend of mine called Vanessa Berlowitz, who was one of the people who made Planet Earth.
Right.
And we were playing around with this question, how do we tell the story? And she rang me up one morning. It was incredibly early. She was in New York, and she told me she was very jet lagged. And it was like 6:00 in the morning. And she's like, "Are you up?" She said, "I'm wearing my pajamas and I've had an idea." And she said,
"Where all the best ideas come from."
She said, "I've been waiting for you for 6:00, so I could wake you up." And she said, "Astronauts. That's what we need to tell this story, is astronauts." And it was one of those amazing light bulb moments. People think that television or any kind of creative project is made up of light bulb moments. In fact, they're really rare. Most of it is kind of a slog. Like you work through alternatives but that was a genuine light bulb moment. And Vanessa was like, they see the Earth from the outside, so they're the ones who understand how it all fits together, which is an idea we'd been talking about. And they have a unique perspective. And we were like, yeah. We were working with Darren Aronofsky by that point, and we went in to see him that morning. We were there working with him. And he was like, yeah, absolutely.
And Darren Aronofsky, just for those who don't know, going right back to, I think, about 1999, he directed the movie Pi, right? And and I think he won the Cannes Film Festival. Sundance Film Festival for that.
I think so.
Yeah, and I mean, he's just is a real visionary in terms of how he tells stories. So wonderful. How did you get him on board?
He was an executive producer. He came on after the show had already been greenlit, people at Fox, Peter Rice and Courtney Munro at Nat Geo were like, maybe you want to find a great kind of visionary person to just be a sort of mentor and kick things around with, and they knew him well. I think Black Swan, which is his big Oscar-nominated feature, had been made through them, and they were like, "You should talk to Darren." And so I went to see him. It was a good connection, and we just instantly kind of did it. His business partner is a guy called Ari Handel, who had been his roommate at Harvard, and the two of them were in love with science and in love with that stuff. So it just happened. It was great. And going back to the astronauts, so I think it's something like only 500 and something people have been into space. So then the question becomes, what astronauts, right? Because you need people who are really good storytellers, and every single one of them are captivating. I've had the honor of being able to sit opposite 3 of them that you had on the series, but they all just know how to tell a story and really draw you in. So did you audition them? How did that work? We did a lot of research. Yeah. I mean, a lot of astronauts are pure scientists.
Yes.
You know,
And scientists can be hard. I mean, from natural history, and we're just in our work in television, we're always looking for those captivating characters. And sometimes the people with the best ideas are not the best at communicating it.
And being an astronaut, a lot of it is about kind of military style precision.
Yes.
It's about controlling your emotions. It's not about like, you know,
Emoting.
Not everyone can access that place in themselves to talk happily about that stuff.
Yes.
And so we were looking for people who not only had been in space, but who could kind of talk about what it meant to them and how they felt and make connections. And yeah, we came across a small group who we just fell in love with. Wonderful, wonderful people.
Rich storytelling. And I think that's the part that I was going to say gravitated towards, but it's just the idea that they had this ability to really communicate what it's like to be 286 miles above the Earth and look down at our beautiful home, this planet Earth, and the way that they could, it was like a spiritual thing. And there isn't I've been lucky enough to meet a few astronauts in my life, and they all say the same thing about looking back on the Earth. It really does affect them spiritually.
Somebody talked about being able to put your thumb over the Earth and looking out the window.
Is that?
And you put your thumb up, and that's us.
Yeah.
And they call it the overlook effect. You know, that once you've seen the Earth in that context, you can't quite ever see anything else in the same way. And the amazing thing about us is it's only in the last 70 years that people have done that. You know, generation in the 70s and 80s now, they were the first people to ever have, in the history of humanity, that experience. Nobody had ever looked back on Earth in that way. And the people that we found for One Strange Rock, they'd all been really deeply touched by it in very different ways. Some of them are religious in a organized religion way. Some of them are religious in a spiritual way. Some of them are scientists who believe in the goodness of the universe. They all have different perspectives, but it's connected the dots for them in a big way.
And I think when there were so many things that they said that really made you think, you know, I remember Jerry Linenger said, when you're up there, I think it was Jerry or Mae Jemison said, you're up there, you can't see borders, you can't see countries. You just see one strange rock floating out in space. And then you realize, well, we're all connected. You know, we're not countries from here. This is just the Earth.
You're a human from that place.
Yes.
You know, that's that blob down there, and the idea that somehow it matters whether you're a Mexican or an American is kind of ridiculous when you're in space.
Right. You don't see walls. I don't, right?
Yeah, exactly.
when you're
no
up
walls,
there.
no walls. And most of the people that we were talking to had been part of the International Space Station.
Yes.
So they'd been part of international crews. Some of them for a really long time, months and months and
Jerry
months.
has the record. Jerry Linenger, right? Doesn't he?
That's
for the
right.
longest American in space.
Yeah.
And that story he told about I mean, these men and women, they're like the explorers of old, you know, the Shackletons of bygone era, right? I mean, they're going out and doing things, and I get so caught up in it. Do you have having done this series now and met these people, do you have a desire to go up there like I do and look back?
I don't know about going up there. Maybe, but I think I definitely think that that idea of that unique perspective is something that you can see why it's caught the imagination of the whole world. And it really has.
One Strange Rock, it's sort of got an edge to it. It's sort of got a bit of an attitude. It seems fitting that Will Smith was the host because the One Strange Rock, I mean, it's got a sense of humor to it. I'm wondering where that came from.
Well, strange came from me
Okay.
because when I ran a network for the BBC, one of our hit comedy shows was Third Rock from the Sun.
Yes.
And so I really liked the rock.
Yes.
Talking about it like a rock rather than a planet. Because
Yes.
planet's quite serious, whereas that joke about Third Rock from the Sun.
Yes.
And then it also being like the idea that it's strange, that it's still like the idea of things being odd and peculiar and kind of not quite connecting up, that you could enjoy stuff just because you say, hey, that's weird.
And I think having Will Smith really did give the series an attitude.
Will was just wonderful. He was amazingly just himself. I
Yes.
mean, and
And
again,
that's not easy to do for a lot of big name actors like that, to be themselves.
it's really a unique gift. And
is.
the thing about Will, I always think, is that if you follow his career from Fresh Prince all the way through, everything he does is always kind of about joy.
Yes.
At one level. Like what made Fresh Prince so lovely to watch was that here he was just delighting in everything, in rap, but also in the whole kind of Beverly Hills kind of thing that he's in, that he just thinks it's all great and funny and weird. And as a person, he's just like that. He's sometimes you meet people with enormous reputations, and when you actually look behind the curtain, they're kind of different.
Yeah.
He's the same. He's
guy.
the same.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to meet him, and I would have said the exact same thing. He just feels like the guy that you see in films, which is always a wonderful surprise, because we've all had those disappointments, right? Where you meet someone you really like on screen, and then they're just not the same person.
No, they're acting.
Yes, they're definitely
they're really
actors.
acting. They're acting like, and yeah, for him, and he's the way he is with his kids and all of that. The fact that he has this wild family that does this amazing stuff and has grasped the potential of social media in an amazing way, and that's exciting.
Every time you speak, I was mentioning every time I've spoken to an astronaut, they all say the same thing about the Earth. And I loved what Chris Hadfield said. He said, I really wish that everybody could have a chance to see the world as I have. Jerry Linenger said the same thing. If I could just give people 5 minutes to go up and look at the world, he said, there'd be no wars, and he said, to see the Earth rejuvenated daily each time you come around. And if you're there long enough, you can see the whole world turned upended, be upended with the change of seasons, and taking a big breath.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it is this fragile place that we live in. And I think when you get so micro the way you did, it really did show that these systems that are in place, just how fragile they are.
Well, one of the things about One Strange Rock is that we never talk about climate change.
No.
And we won some award at a festival last year for being the best environmental program by stealth, right? Because we never advertised it as this is about climate change or this is about environmentalism, but it's very hard to watch it and not to think those things. And that was a very deliberate strategy on everyone's behalf, so that allows you to join the dots about that stuff.
Absolutely. There's that one part where Will is talking about the Amazon breathing, the lungs of the earth, I think he said at one point. And when you hear him talk about it that way, you don't need to stress how important it is for us to look after the environment. He's just saying, look, on this strange rock, this is what happens. And then you realize, wow, I guess that means we really need to protect this beautiful place.
Yeah. David Attenborough, who I worked with at the BBC and at Discovery on Planet Earth, he has a saying, which is, before you can save the planet, you have to fall in love with it. And I think that's always been his mantra. First, you've got to fall in love with it, and then you can do something about it. And I think that was something which I was very mindful of when we were making One Strange Rock.
Do you think we're going to be okay, by the way, Jane?
Hope so. Fingers crossed.
Okay.
Hope so.
I'm hoping that programs like yours will, give us the best possible chance of saving what we have.
Yeah.
Man. So just talking about going into a series. So you start with these initial talks with Tim Pastore. Now and at some point you had a discussion about it being 10 pilots, but you've pretty much got an empty slate. You got to pull the team together. How do you go about then going, well, what are we going to shoot? Where are we going to go? Where does this start?
Well, it's like building a house,
Yes.
You start off with a little drawing, and then you iterate and have ideas and add pieces on and move pieces around, and we have an office with lots of big whiteboards, and people write things up, and you find breakthroughs. You say, this story is an example of something we should do, or this footage. If you spend your life making those kind of programs, and someone says, we're going to make the biggest show about this subject that you've devoted years and years to, will you come and be part of it? It's like a lot of people want to join in.
Yeah, and you've been credited with sort of creating these mega docs, right? I mean, which has become the new in thing. Like everybody wants to be doing these, but the amount of trust, like you said, there's big money, it's big risk. Do Do you ever lose sleep at night when you're thinking about this? I mean, maybe once you've got a couple under your belt, but I'm just wondering if you ever wake up in a panic and think, oh, what have I done?
Oh, God, all the time.
Yeah.
But you have to, I think it's that thing of being on the edge of being very scared.
Yes.
We had a little mantra on our team, which is that you don't fuck up now and again, you're not trying hard enough.
Yes.
And that was our sort of thing, which was like, we're going to try.
Encouraging you to take some risks.
We're going to do some brave things. And
Yeah.
we did lots of really great things, some of which were wonderful and some of which were like, didn't work. And people barely remember the ones that didn't work. But the ones that did, people remember.
When the buck stops with you, and it did, particularly there, I mean, you were behind some incredible series over there, right? You were there at the BBC with The Office,
Yeah, I greenlit the first series of the British Office. Yeah.
Top Gear,
Yep.
The Weakest Link.
Yep.
And people have said that, you know, of all the BBC controllers, you were very successful, and we obviously were successful. I'm just wondering, what is it that you have, do you think, that where you're able to identify what is going to work? Because that is that magic sauce. That is what all producers, directors, everybody is looking for. But to hit it again and again and again, like you have, there's something that you must, like, do you get a gut instinct when you hear an idea, or what is it?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose I do kind of, I come from a background that's really not like a television world at all.
You were a journalist,
but my
right?
parents had a shop called Roots Rejects, which would have been like a dollar store.
Okay.
In a place called Canvey Island, which is outside London, which is a kind of joke. It's like Coney Island in New York. It's like fun fairs, but also an oil refinery. And it's a kind of strange place, like Jersey City, or
Yeah.
it's like very working class, kind of, but also, you know, if you say to people in Britain you come from Canvey Island, they laugh. You know, they're like,
That's
really?
the first reaction?
That's the first reaction.
That doesn't seem fair.
It's like, really? You come from Canvey? People talk about Essex girls.
Okay.
And that's like the Jersey Shore. And Canvey Island is like an extreme version of just this weird, slightly kind of offbeat, slightly criminal kind of.
Now we see why you like shows like The Office
You
and
know,
One
it's like,
Straight Drunk.
so I come from that world where nothing about, though I came from a family that were interested in everything. We were
Yes.
always interested in all this different stuff.
Did you have the subscription to the Encyclopedia Britannica, or like where was your curiosity?
We had things, a magazine called Finding Out, and my dad and mum were both really into, like, every summer we would choose a different subject that the
Yes.
family was going to go and investigate, and we would go and look at stuff and find stuff out. And my parents were always like interested in a ton of different stuff, and they were quite active politically, but we weren't at all like a kind of, you know, I was the first person in my family to go to college. You know, we weren't like,
So humble beginnings.
you know, just so I suppose I just kind of I'm interested in a lot of stuff.
And reading just some of the background and some of your quotes, you talk a lot about the nitty gritty of production, which is always a sure sign that people really like the intricacies of television making. And there was a quote that you said, sometimes you just need a snail. And I was wondering if you could tell the story where that came from, because it had to do with this micro moment.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right, with the snail. And you said, I'll let you explain it, but I love this story.
On One Strange Rock, one of the things that we wanted to look at was oxygen
Yes.
being formed, and how oxygen is created in the world, and how it's created in the oceans, and how we all have oxygen as
How
a
are we
result.
living and breathing?
How are we living and breathing? But to film oxygen bubbles actually being created is a really, really difficult thing, and it takes. You have this algae on rocks, and you want to figure out the micro photography, and no one could do it. We had this big tank in our office, and everyone was trying. And then amazing filmmaker Graham Booth, who's going to play a big role on the second series of One Strange Rock.
Oh, I was going to ask you that later. So it is coming back? That's
Oh, yeah.
official?
It's come back.
All right, wonderful.
And he said, I know what we need, snails. And everyone was like, what?
What?
You know? And he said, yeah, we got to get the bubbles to come more slowly. So he went and got a bunch of snails. I don't know where he got them from. You do get a lot of snails in London gardens, so maybe he brought some with him, I don't know. But anyway, he put snails on these rocks, and the sticky kind of slime that snails needed, it just made the bubbles leave the rocks a tiny bit slower, right? And that meant that they managed to film them, because otherwise they would just...
So the bubbles get formed, but then they disappear very, very quickly. And that was the challenging part, was capturing that moment.
Yeah, so you wanted to actually see the bubble, because the moment the bubbles were formed, they went to the surface and they were gone. And we just needed something to just delay the process a tiny bit, and it was snails. And we all just thought it was so funny that here we had, a lot of very expensive equipment, and like we got the result we needed from a bunch of garden snails.
Sometimes know-how is better than the right. You've got to have, and that must be a wonderful thing too, where you have the ability to go, so who's the best person in the world at using a phantom? Let's get that person in to shoot. Yeah. Right?
And then they still needed the snails.
Yeah. And then it comes down to those tiny little things. And I think that's one of the, again, from a entertainment point of view, the ability to be able to go right into the bubble of a snail and then to pull back out into space again. And you were literally shooting up in space. I mean, how many television shows shoot up in space, like in a series? That's so bold.
Well, that was a really interesting process, because what we wanted to try and do was not just have the same kind of footage that people often have from space, but actually tell a story. And so Darren Aronofsky, the filmmaker, worked with an astronaut called Paolo, Italian astronaut, and he kind of gave him like a seminar in how to do a sequence, tight shot, wide shot.
I thought that was so cool.
And so Paolo filmed all this stuff in space, and he totally got into it, which was wonderful. So when Peggy Whitson, who was one of our wonderful astronauts, when she was leaving to come home after being the woman who'd been in space for the longest ever,
she was on the cover of National Geographic magazine too, wasn't she?
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to talk with her. Oh my goodness.
She's just amazing.
Powerhouse.
Amazing. But he was filming her leaving the space station, and he was just completely into getting the right sequence. It was wonderful. So he was like, I want to become a filmmaker. What are you going to do after you stop being an astronaut? He was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. So that was pretty great.
Can you give us any hints for like what's going to happen the next season? Are you going to also go back up into space again, or have you got a different approach?
We're just working it out at the moment. I think there's lots and lots of places on Earth that we haven't dealt with. And I think while the space thing will always be there, I think this is more going to be focused on the interconnections here. And I think that we're going to perhaps go more deeply into the micro photography, of which there was some in the first series, but I think seeing some astounding things here on Earth, we're going to go further with that.
I really love that. You've spoken a number of times in your interviews about connections. My wife, a producing partner, is very much about like putting, as you said, putting up paper and writing things down. And it's amazing once it's visually represented how you can find those connections and how much that helps you with the storytelling. I can't, and it's why I've had a moleskin for 25 years and write everything down, because there's something wonderful about, for ideas and brainstorming, and everybody can see.
Absolutely.
Is that sort of a process that you've
and we always have in Nutopia, I'm like, where's the whiteboards? Anytime you get a new office, like, where's the whiteboards? We're in an old-fashioned London building on lots of different floors, and we're often getting new offices and moving around, but every room has a big whiteboard, because I kind of often can't, I have to sort of write things down in order to kind of get my brain going, It's like, and it allows you to stand up and walk around in a meeting and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it does, and point and, and also you just want things to be visually, and that's how I remember things. Is that also how you sort of think of the puzzle pieces and how they go together?
Yeah, completely.
You've come through an era of television where you've seen like dramatic changes between the role of men and women in television. I mean, it's changed so dramatically. You mentioned your 13-year-old daughter. I have a 23-year-old daughter who's just getting into the business, just started as a story producer. It's a very exciting time for women, particularly for the young ones coming up. They're coming into a different world, a different realm of possibilities, right?
Completely. I think it's like, it just finally with the moment we're in.
Yeah.
It feels like some of the crap of the past. Everyone's like, really? That stuff used to go on, or that stuff still goes on a bit, but we're getting rid of it. I just think it's like, it's a new beginning. It's
Well,
really
the sensibilities too, I think, are coming through in the storytelling. So for a long time, it was a very male perspective, and we were like ignoring this other part of the audience in a lot of ways as program makers. And I've been involved with projects where you really want that balance, because a male perspective can be quite different from a female perspective.
Completely, and lots of different perspectives, and men, women, different races, different
sexual orientation, cultural backgrounds.
It's like the world's becoming more connected, and it's really good to have not just see things all in the same way.
Yeah. I was wondering if you, going into this other series, whether there's a slight, well, again, I mean, you want to be nervous, but you're going in, you're doing something that was so successful, and you're going in to do it again. And a lot of people say, well, you can't beat the original, that expression. Do you get nervous about the idea of having to meet that standard again? Or do you think,
I think it's funny, but I think that sometimes with these projects, maybe you feel like this is the same with yours, that they never quite feel like they're finished. Like you're always like, if only we'd have got there, or we didn't manage to do that, or they feel like, and because we knew that we were going to try and do a second series almost before the first one was completely finished.
At some point there was a quote you had where you said, look, I don't even mind if people turn off the sound, because it's just meant to be this beautiful visual, if they want to watch it like that, then fine. And it does hold up like that. It's like something you could just have on.
I think it's that thing that you can have access at lots of different points, right? So you can watch it, you could watch it and write notes to yourself to look stuff up in Scientific American afterwards, or you can watch it with the sound toned down and some music turned up and it just be glorious. And I don't really mind. I think that thing of multiple access points is great. You don't only have to watch something in one way. And people, I think filmmakers used to get very, like, it has to be,
they get hung up,
done in one way.
Yeah.
I was reading a thing in a magazine the other week, and someone was, a cinematographer was talking about it. Someone asked him, like, you must get very offended at the idea of people watching your amazing film on their iPhones. And he was like, no, actually, I think it's really cool. It's great that you can see it at a huge cinema on IMAX. But if someone's going to work and watching it on their phone on the subway, that's cool too. And I thought, that's a kind of modern way of thinking about what you create.
And you've said too that you love the idea that people can just make something that goes up on YouTube that is just super inexpensive, a real contrast to what you've been doing with your big mega docs, but you love that too, right? And that's changed so much.
You don't have to. Creative, interesting things are about finding the essence of what's right for them. It's not, some things need a lot of money to achieve and some things need almost nothing. The beginning of The Office was a little 5-minute film that somebody made on a trainee scheme. It wasn't...
Is that right?
Stephen Marchant, who is Ricky Gervais's producing partner. Stephen was what... The BBC has a scheme called the TAPS, Trainee Assistant Producer Scheme. And people who have these comparatively lowly jobs get to compete for a place on this scheme, which is once a year, and you get a week to make a 5-minute film. And I think about 50 people a year get to go on this scheme. And he got his friend Ricky Gervais, who he did some job, late night job on a radio show. Like, they had the 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock shift on a local radio station in London. And they hated the guy that they worked for. And they had this comedy sketch they used to do. And somehow and he made that as his little film. And it got shown to people. And that's how we got to...
Is that what you saw when...
Yeah. And we were like... It just made me really laugh, because I was working for the BBC, which was all about sort of the moment when all of that management speak was really coming home to roost. So it just made me and the rest of the team really laugh. And we were like, oh, let's do a pilot.
And sometimes those things don't transfer when they're tried in a different country, but they really made it work over here as well. I mean, I love Ricky Gervais. I think he's like the best, but still, it came over here, became a big hit too.
I think management bullshit somehow infected the whole world.
Yeah, everybody can relate to the...
And the idea of the obnoxious boss, kind of, but not obnoxious in mean, just... Okay. My husband at that point was a lawyer working in London, and The first series of The Office in Britain wasn't a success at all. Not many people watched it. But his assistant sent him a little JPEG, this was before YouTube, of Ricky Gervais, and she sent it round the office rather appallingly and said, does this remind anybody of anybody? Right, and it was about their boss. And my husband came home and said, look what I got. He said, I think maybe other people in offices might be doing that. And I took it into the office the next morning. We're like, maybe there's a lot of bosses like that around.
Yeah, this was almost like therapy for people, right? Jane, was wondering, we talked about shooting in space. We talked about how you were underground 1,600 feet. And I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the locations, because like shooting in Ethiopia in the desert, and the drones are falling out of the sky, and you're in this hostile. It's almost like being on another planet.
Absolutely.
There, right?
One of the scariest places that we shot was nearly 2 miles underground, and that was extraordinary. The crew had to go through this whole system of taking everything you took in. You had to take out even your poop.
Everything, yes.
Even poop. And they had to even cut the labels out of their clothes, out of their wetsuits and stuff, because you weren't allowed to take anything that might have fibers that might get left behind in this cave. And
the cave was where, Jane?
The cave was in Mexico.
Yep.
And one of the very, very experienced camera team had to get out after 2 days. He just couldn't bear the silence down there.
Really?
We had to do a quick evacuation of him. So that was like a really extraordinary moment of that. 2 miles underground is a really long way.
And I've worked in caves as well. I had a similar experience where half the crew panicked and we had to get them out, and then we continued to go down and we stayed overnight. And I found it incredibly difficult. I was only down there for a day and then the night, and then we came out, but it really does affect you. And you start to process, as you're drifting off to sleep, you start to process the idea that all that rock is above you.
Yeah.
So I can't, yeah. And
these guys stay for 7 days.
I just really cannot imagine that, yeah.
It's like, so that was
and you're lugging all the gear, and you're going through the tight spaces, and you constantly just... It's glacial, the movement through those caves and up and down, and the ropes and.
Yeah, and this was even before those boys got trapped in the cave. Which, any time that anyone's doing that now, they must be thinking of that even more so.
Right, especially with the water.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, and then in the desert in Africa.
Danakil. That was.
Explain to us Danakil, because it really is like Mars on Earth. It's just. It's so hostile.
It's the most toxic place, but it's not toxic because humans have made it toxic. It's toxic because of gases bubbling up from beneath from the center of the earth, and it's extraordinary that there is life there.
Yeah.
But there is. But you have to wear these intensely protective suits and sleep in them too. You have to sleep with gas masks on, because the gases. It's basically that you see what you look like pools of water, but they're pools of acid. And one of the most hostile places in the world. And
it must have just trashed your gear. I mean, Scott and I did a shoot in Nicaragua, and we took, actually that camera was one of them, and we went down into a volcano, and it just destroyed all the gear, the sulfur dioxide, which becomes sulfuric acid, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And so I heard you had drones falling out of the sky.
We did, and the same with the volcano. A volcano unexpectedly erupted when we were filming it, and that again, we had drones.
That's not good.
Drones that never came back, and we had drones that suicide drones that we knew that would never come back. So we were, there's a lot of equipment wastage goes on those kind of shoots.
Yeah, any other locations that you can remember to talk about?
I think they're the most extreme ones. I mean, I think in the next series we're starting to think about filming a lot under the sea.
Yeah.
We didn't go a really long way under the sea in the first series, and there's a lot of stuff down there.
Yeah, that perspective thing that you talked about, where you're able to slow everything down, use phantom cameras which can crank up to 1,000 frames a second, and just look at the world in that different perspective. Is that sort of more where you're going to go digging?
Yeah.
When do we expect to see that?
Be the end of next year. They take about nearly 2 years to make and then market.
At the end of the interview, Jane, I asked people a couple of questions. What I do is I ask people, if you were going to go on a road trip and let's say you were going to go across America, and you could take anybody with you in the car from any time in history, living or dead, people maybe you have met or haven't met, who would you take in the car with you? And you can drive or let somebody else drive. It's totally up to you.
Okay. I think I have to make it a girls' road trip. Sorry, husband. But I think it would have to be a girls' trip.
Okay, so you could take 3 with you, 3 girls.
3 girls. You'd want to take someone who was sensible, but who would also... You want them all to be a lot of fun.
Like Helen Mirren would be a lot of fun, wouldn't she?
Helen Mirren would be great. Yeah,
she's got such a great personality. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just saying I love her. Have you had a chance to meet her?
Yes. She's fantastic. Helen Mirren would be great because she has a wild sense of humour.
Yes.
And she's also really badly behaved.
Is she?
Oh yeah, she's kind of like...
Do you
she's
like
known.
that?
I like a bit of badly behaved. You know,
Okay.
I like a little... She just doesn't care. And I think that on a road trip like that, you'd have to have someone who's like, what the hell? God,
Yeah.
let's just,
Let your hair down.
Let's just go for it. You know, you got to have some of that, really. You'd want to have a great woman from history. I don't know if people in the rest of the world know about her, but Boadicea was the queen of the Insii, who was the tribe that stood up to the Romans. And every kid in British school learns about Boadicea.
Okay.
She had a chariot which had knives facing outwards from the wheels.
Right. Sounds like Spartacus.
Yeah. And she was the queen of the Insii. So she was the queen of a large part of Britain when the Romans invaded. And she held up the Romans for quite a long while on their invasion.
You like strong, feisty women.
I like strong, feisty women.
Yep.
You know, surprise.
Why not? You're a strong, feisty woman.
So
okay.
I think I'd have to have the two. I'd have to have the two.
I have
of
a
them.
feeling she's going to be wanting to drive if she, you know.
Oh yeah, she's a driver. Gotta be. And then we want someone. I think you'd have to be. I think you'd have to have a great woman like you'd have a Julia Child or someone like that who's going to do the
Janis Joplin, maybe
do the cook, do the food.
Oh, the food. Well, yes,
you have to have
I didn't
someone,
think about that.
I think you'd have to have like someone who's going to do great. You know, just get down and do great food.
Okay, and then your final day on Earth, on one strange rock, if you knew that you were going to be living your final day on Earth and you could do whatever you want with that day, what would you want to do with it?
I'd have to be by the beach, I'd have to be with my family, and I have some very lovely dogs, and I'd have to be with them. They like to swim, and I'd like to be on the beach.
Jane, I really appreciate you taking your time. I know you're here in New Orleans and you've got a lot of meetings, and the fact that you took a little time to come up here and talk is just, I really appreciate it. And sometimes it's nice to meet the people who are behind the big ideas, because obviously you're not out there like Will Smith, but you know, somebody's got to make these things happen. And I am extremely excited to see what's going to happen with One Strange Rock 2. Are you going to call it One Strange Rock 2? Because that doesn't...
No one's kind of just talked about that.
We haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah, we'll see.
A stranger rock. One stranger rock.
I think that might be
the
it.
The rock just got stranger. I don't know.
I think stranger's a good word.
Stranger, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. To see more great interviews, go to philkeoghan.com and subscribe to BUCKiT with Phil Keoghan wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider rating and reviewing us. And follow BUCKiT, that's BUCKiT with an IT, on Instagram and Facebook. Also, follow me on Twitter @PhilKeoghan. See you soon.